Hi, Counselor Corrigan. I was just testing sound and audio. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Good afternoon, everyone. This Tuesday, July 16th, 2024, meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck?
Here.
Councillor Afghans joining via Zoom. Councillor Wendland?
Here.
Councillor Verdick?
Here.
Councillor Rapf?
Here.
And Councillor Corrigan is joining via Zoom, and Councillor Mboop will be joining us later.
Okay. We will take note when he arrives. Now, everyone, will you please stand if you're able and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible. We're going to start with a couple special awards tonight. Or today, on the nighttime. So today we're recognizing Doug McKean and Bruce Poinsett as two pillars of our community and our city's civic life who passed away earlier this year. It's a difficult time for their families, friends, neighbors, and all of us who worked with Doug and Bruce over the years. And we extend our heartfelt condolences to all of you family members here present with us today. We're fortunate to have the Poinsett family and the McKean family present so that we can honor these two men and their contributions to the city. Both Doug and Bruce were tightly woven into the fabric of Lake Oswego, and among their extensive acts of service to the community, we had the privilege of working most closely with them as leaders on our boards and commissions. Their actions as members of our city boards and as two community leaders outside their city volunteer roles have both set the example for other community members to follow and left a lasting impression on the community. As much as we miss them both and will always remember their service, we know no one misses them as dearly and wholeheartedly as their loved ones. And we're glad that they can all be here together with us today to say, as we say, a few words in their honor and present them with Distinguished Service Awards. So I'd like to start by inviting Doug's family to join us up front, please. I have Doug's wife, Sarah, please, and his two sisters, Laura and Heather, daughter, Katie, and grandson, Liam. So since 2018, Doug has been a member of the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Advisory Board, and he was most recently elected by his peers to serve as one of our co-chairs. Parks Director Ivan Anderholm shared that Doug was known for his patient and thoughtful approach to problem solving and communicating. His approach will continue to be the standard that we strive for. I was fortunate to be able to work closely with Doug on several challenging community issues in recent years. Doug was always quick to raise his hand, to step forward, and to lead even when the issues were difficult. He was held in high regard by those he served with and others in the community as someone who treated others with compassion, kindness, and operated with the highest integrity. I also learned that Doug played the drums in the Slow Jam Band, which played every Tuesday at the Adult Community Center. It's a big part of the community. Doug's selfless dedication to Lake Oswego's natural areas, parks, programs, the community at large have left a lasting impression on everyone here, especially in our Parks and Rec department. Sarah, I'd like to present this to you. Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, okay. Please.
So, Mayor Buck and council members, on behalf of Doug's family, we thank you for this honor and accept it in his memory. Doug would have been very pleased to accept this award, but he also would have been quick to tell you that he was doing what he loved. He felt strongly that all members of this community should give back as they are able. He was following in the footsteps of those who came before him, the mothers of Springbrook Park, Ed Chen, Cal Burt, Paul Lyons, and many other volunteers. And he was now paying it forward to Liam and Connor, his grandsons. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, please, Bruce Willie. Willie is Bruce's wife and Bruce Jr., Bruce's son. He's coming. So Bruce recently served on the Development Review Commission and immediately put his stamp on the work. His background in architecture, as well as a wealth of practical knowledge as an occupational safety consultant, was a huge asset to the commission. He was able to understand the process of how a project transitioned from pretty graphics and technical reports to actual construction in the physical and at times dangerous world. He was also sought out by his colleagues and city staff for his stories of projects going sideways and the lengths people would go to just get the job done. Planning manager Johanna Hasty shared that the planners who worked with Bruce, quote, appreciated the trust he demonstrated for staff's analysis, generously acknowledging our time and efforts. Bruce was always down to talk shop, and I like that because I am too. And he was a man dedicated to his family and also someone who loved his life's work. So at community events, I always will look for Bruce to catch up on the latest, discuss various city projects, but not in any ex parte way, do not worry, and talk community business. I always found that Bruce was never the loudest, but he was always present, always felt, and always a kind reminder of how great the Lake Oswego community is. A great support he was to his wife, his son, in their tremendous community building efforts. He served the same role with great distinction on the DRC. To present both of you with this Distinguished Service Award on Bruce's behalf. On behalf of all the city council, city staff, and boards and commissions, we're forever grateful for Bruce's and for Doug's dedication to the community. We thank you and your families for sharing their talents, passion, and time with us. Would you like to say?
Thank you from the family for recognizing Bruce, or I have to say, Bruce Sr. or what, but Bruce R. Poinsett. He loved to do the work and loved to share his knowledge. Yes, he was a talker. He had something to say about everything. Had a little bit of knowledge about everything. And so he loved it, loved it, and loved working on the commission. And so I'm glad that he's being recognized for it. We miss him, but his heart was there. And just keep us in your thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you, Willie. Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. We have a couple other recent losses in the community. Ellie McPeak served on the city council from 2000 until 2008, having been a contemporary with other past leaders such as Judy Hammerstad, Jack Hoffman, Mary Puskas, and John Tershi. The early aughts in our community were a time of exciting development for Lake Oswego, especially downtown and along the Willamette River with the Foothills Park development. Ellie remained an extremely engaged member of the community after her time on the council and continued to lend her voice and perspective to our civic life. Her actions helped form the community into what we know it as today, and her presence as a neighbor-dedicated volunteer and a colleague to all of us will be greatly missed. The team at the city and many members of our community are also mourning the sudden, unexpected loss of two incredible people within the city organization, Todd Nepper and Julie Hollister. Julie worked for the city for over 24 years in the building division of the Community Development Department. Her position was as a senior permit technician, and that position works closely with the building official to perform complex technical duties in supporting permit center processes and providing customers with information and technical assistance. Julie was larger than life in many ways and known for her ability to connect with contractors and community members and help them through the process. Todd Nepper worked for the city for over 13 years in the engineering department. He was in the position of principal engineer, with his primary focus being on development review, as well as providing supervision to several staff. Todd was smart, incredibly hardworking, and demonstrated the highest level of professionalism in his work. He had an exceptional working relationship with the development community, collaborating with many to make projects happen. Both Todd and Julie were exemplary coworkers and dedicated to the mission of the city, serving so many residents and community members over the years. They combined exceptional professional ability with their ability to forge so many positive relationships through their work. On behalf of the City Council, we express our deepest condolences to their families, friends, and many coworkers who we know will continue to hold them heavy in their hearts for a long time to come. And with that, we're going to take a short recess. Okay, we're back in order, and next on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? So we have, and then I think some of you here might be here to give comment on items later in the agenda that we have specific time on the agenda for, so, okay. Great. So with that, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda tonight is item 6.1, which is accepting the 2024 City Council Goals second quarter update. Item 6.2, which is the pavement striping and marking services contract award. Item 6.3, resolution 24-22. Item 6.4, resolution 24-26. Item 6.5, resolution 24-32. And item 6.6, approval of meeting minutes from May 7th, May 21st, and June 4th. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, motion made by Councilor Raff, seconded by Councilor Winland. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, any opposed? None? Okay, motion passes 6-0. All right. Next on the agenda is a public hearing in consideration of Ordinance 2946. This is an ordinance annexing to the city of Lake Oswego one parcel consisting of 0.54 acres at 13699 Knaus Road, declaring city of Lake Oswego zoning of R15 pursuant to LOC Chapter 50.01.004.5 A through C, and removing the territory from certain districts. We will start by a review of the hearing procedure by Ms. Osenek.
Thank you, Mayor Buck, members of the council. Now is the time set for the public hearing on this particular annexation. And this request is a legislative decision soundly within your discretion, but you must apply the criteria and standards that are listed in the staff report. Testimony and evidence, if any, from the public should also be directed towards that criteria. The public hearing process is as follows: presentation by staff, testimony by the applicant, up to 20 minutes if they so desire. Any individual can have 5 minutes. Recognized neighbor associations, homeowners, government or government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations can have 10 minutes. The applicant, if they choose to be here, can have a rebuttal up to 5 minutes, and the time limits do not include time spent responding to questions from the City Council. Any person in attendance may cede their time to another person, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. At this time, is there any financial conflicts of interest that any counselor needs to declare?
No.
Seeing none, we're ready for the staff report.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Osenek.
Thanks, Ellen. Mayor Buck, members of the council, we have before us this evening one property at 13699 Knaus Road being considered for annexation as a public hearing. And the plan and zone designation, it's currently zoned low-density residential R20 in Clackamas County, and it's designated R15, low-density residential on the City of Lake Oswego Comprehensive Plan, and it will be zoned R15 upon annexation. And just real quickly, under development potential in the council report, the word "can" should be deleted so that it reads, based on the size and shape of the parcel cannot be further divided. Even though we did annex 13501 earlier in 2023, that property could probably be divided up into 7 parcels. And since these 2 parcels are under the same ownership, it is likely they will be combined and divided into one cohesive development in the future, but we have not received a pre-application for this. So we don't quite know what's going to happen, but that's likely what will happen, assuming that people will want to develop those 2 properties at their fullest potential under the zone. The service is available from the City of Lake Oswego 8-inch collection line on Knaus Road, and this line terminates approximately 450 feet to the southeast of the site between 13744 and 13750 Knaus Road. Following the city wastewater master plan, any future public sewer connection for this site would require the sewer to be extended up Knaus Road instead of through any kind of easement. Water is also available from a city 8-inch water main in Knaus Road, and the existing home on the site is already connected to the public main. The nearest fire hydrant is approximately 130 feet north of the site along the west side of Knaus Road. And this is an aerial photo showing the tree canopy cover and the development around the existing property. And staff finds that these properties are within the urban services boundary or this property is within the urban services boundary, and public services can be provided in a timely and orderly and efficient manner. And it's timely in regards to the public facilities and recommends approval of the annexation and to enact Ordinance 2946. And I'm open for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Espy. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Espy, online? No? Okay. All right. With that, then we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Yes, open the public hearing. I'll ask, is the applicant here, and would they like to, is the applicant here? No.
They are.
No applicant. Okay. Is there anyone here who would like to testify on this annexation? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Move to enact Ordinance 2946.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made by Councilor Windland, seconded by Councilor Raff. Is there any discussion? Anyone? No? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. And we'll note that Councilor Umboop has now joined us on Zoom. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Espy.
Certainly.
All right, next on the agenda is a study session on the housing production strategy. This is PP 22-0005. We have Mr. Olson, senior planner, joining us.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good
afternoon, councilors. I'm also joined by some folks from our consultant team at MIG virtually here via Zoom. Joined by Kate Rogers and Matt Hasty, both from our consultant team at MIG. Kate will be helping me with a good chunk of the presentation today, and we'll be sharing her screen as we go through the slides here. So, Kate, if you can go ahead and share your screen, I'll get going. All right, so we're here today to talk about the draft housing production strategy. We've talked a lot about this in the last year or so, sort of subsequent to or following the adoption of the housing needs analysis. So we're getting further along and have developed a draft document, and we're hoping to talk a bit about that, talk a bit about the implementation timeline, but mostly focus on two of the strategies that we are looking for further direction from you on that were not previously discussed. Next slide. So I'll start out by just giving a little bit of an update on what we've done since we were last here at Council in April to sort of engage with the public and get more information. And then Kate will talk a little bit more about what we've included in the housing production strategy, and specifically we'll focus on the homeowner opportunity limited tax or home buyer opportunity limited tax exemption and the multiple unit property tax exemption. So HOLTE and MUPTE are the two strategies we're going to focus on today. I'll then talk about some next steps for the project. All right, so I'll just briefly touch on public engagement. It hasn't been too long since we discussed this with you here at the City Council. We were here on April 2nd for a joint study session with the Planning Commission. If you want to go to the next slide, Kate. So since that time, in the time since our April study session, we had one more housing production task force meeting, really a similar kind of orientation where we're talking about what was proposed in the housing production strategy, kind of where things landed, making sure that folks were comfortable with where things landed and were in support of the recommendations. So we held that meeting with the HPS task force, and then subsequently to that, very soon after, we talked with the Planning Commission, I guess on June 24th, so just a few days after is when we talked to the Planning Commission about this as well. So again, similar kind of focus on what ended up in the draft housing production strategy, but really trying to hone in on some of the strategies where further discussion was needed. Next slide. So that's, of course, in addition to all the previous public engagement we've already described, so I'm just trying to move quickly for you all today. So one of the main sort of events that occurred in the previous, or the last few months, since we last spoke about this, was that we received a letter from Habitat for Humanity, and they essentially requested that we include an additional strategy in the housing production strategy, or just that we consider adopting it, regardless of whether it's in the HPS, I suppose. But essentially, they were talking about this Homebuyer Opportunity Limited Tax Exemption Program. So I'm going to refer to it as HOLTE for the purposes of not saying too many words all at once. Essentially, the way that this strategy works is it's a 10-year property tax exemption for lower-income homebuyers, basically to allow them to purchase units valued at no more than 120% of the city median sales price. So it's worth pointing out that that's different than the area median income that we use for a lot of these calculations. So when we talk about 120% of city median sales price, that's actually quite a bit more than what we would look at for the county level, which is the area median income. So that means that the way that the program is structured is quite loose, and it could apply in theory to home values that are quite expensive, so up to $940,000, based on what our current sort of median is within the city. So that's kind of something that we want to flag. The city does have discretion to set its own levers, if you will, or require that those incomes be significantly lower if that was something that we wanted to include as a part of this program. So there's that sort of income restriction that could be added. So Portland, I just mentioned Portland is the only place thus far where this has been implemented. And in Portland, they limit it to 100% of the city median sales price. So, we could do something different here in Lake Oswego if we were so inclined. I would also mention that there's the ability to apply this within different geographical areas. So as part of the proposal for adopting our program, we would have to sort of define where this would be available to home buyers. So there is the ability to sort of limit the applicability or just kind of cover the entire city depending on what our sort of policy choice is there. I would just mention also, again, Portland is our only real example of where this has been implemented so far. And in Portland, they require homes to have at least 3 bedrooms unless they're built within a transit-oriented area, which they define on a map. And in that case, they allow 2-bedroom homes to receive the exemption. So it's just kind of structured differently depending on the geography in Portland. I would also just indicate that the HOLTE would apply to the structure, but not the land. The property taxes would still need to be paid for the land, but this would exempt the structure from property taxes. That's kind of how this is set up. And I guess I'd also mention that the 10-year exemption is placed on a property, so that property can be transferred subject to income restrictions and affordability limitations, but it doesn't apply to the individual necessarily that's receiving the exemption by owning the property. So if they sold and moved on, the property exemption, the tax exemption would stay with the property. So it applies to the structure and it stays with the property itself. I would just mention, this is a strategy that could help to address some of the need that we identified in the housing needs analysis for home ownership options within the city. There really aren't any other strategies that we've looked at that can really get us there. But we didn't include this initially, as you probably have noted, in the draft housing production strategy, more or less because we didn't really consider that it would have a large impact here within the city. I think the idea that a nonprofit developer could be using this was something that we did not necessarily consider in that calculus. So, this kind of new letter from Habitat for Humanity has forced us to reanalyze the strategy to a degree. And so, I think just pointing out a little bit of what was touched on in that Habitat letter, they argued that, the home ownership in general, is kind of this generational wealth building strategy, that the idea is that this is kind of a catalytic strategy, and it's kind of something that would, it's considered transformational, as they mentioned in the letter, and is intended to sort of help folks improve their economic circumstances over time. That's part of this, and I think generally speaking, they consider this a very good strategy, HOLTE in particular, a good strategy to, catalyze homeownership. So, I guess the idea is a little bit different than what we might consider for other types of tax exemptions where the property is maintained with the specific income restrictions over time. The way this is structured would allow folks' incomes to increase over time. And, of course, there is an ability, I guess, that the city could have to monitor that more closely, but I think just kind of the spirit of the strategy is to sort of catalyze that generational wealth building. So I just want to kind of point out that that is kind of baked in here to a degree. The kind of savings we're talking about for instance, the Westlake Grove townhomes that are being constructed by Habitat, or they're under construction now, would be, $333 to $375 a month, depending on the size of the unit. So generally speaking, not all of that would be exempted. Only the portion of that that is applicable to the structure would be exempted. So there still would be a small property tax for the land. So yeah, that is kind of a general overview of Holte. We have one more slide, Kate. I don't know if you mind just going up one more. And so, generally, we just wanted to open up the question of, should we consider this to be included in the HPS at this point, considering what we've heard from Habitat, considering kind of the ability for nonprofits to use this might be a little bit different than what we had originally envisioned here. And so, our sort of recommendation, if we were to adopt this strategy, would be to try to target affordability at 80% of AMI or less for this program. It would, the way it's structured, allow for up to 120%, but we've in our discussions with the Planning Commission and with the HPS Task Force, there was a desire to set sort of a lower income sort of restriction on this, so that it wouldn't necessarily be used for that really higher income type of housing unit I was describing earlier in the presentation. So this is kind of a general, question here. Should we include this in the HPS? That goes to public hearing. And if so, do you have any thoughts on the different levers or sort of considerations that we should consider for this type of a program?
Okay, any questions for Mr. Olson on the Holte? Councilor Wendland.
So on this, so you said that the exemption would stay with the house if they moved away. So what happens if somebody moves into the house that's making 180% of income? Do they lose the?
They wouldn't be able to move into the house. They would have to be, there's an agreement that it would be restricted, and incomes would be restricted over that 10-year period for the folks. So basically, the way that Portland implements this is they verify income when the house is purchased, generally the first sort of the very beginning of the 10-year cycle. When it's transferred, they would then re-verify income for whoever purchases the property.
Okay,
so that's how they do it there.
So you're only income verified when you apply for the program. In the next 10 years, let's just say we have 2 medical students that just get out, they have their residency, and they qualify for everything the first year, so that they're whatever income. And then all of a sudden now, in year 3, 4, and 5, they're making 3 times X, 4 times X, 5 times X. They still get the exemption.
That's the way that this was kind of envisioned, I think. I think it's worth mentioning, though, that the city would theoretically be able to enforce that over time and monitor that if that was something that we so chose to do. I just want to point out that the sort of, I think in a lot of ways, the thrust of this program is to facilitate that sort of income mobility, to allow folks to increase their sort of incomes and build that wealth over time. Again, in Portland, which is the only example again, they do sort of a 2-year background. They look at 2 years of W-2s going backwards, and sort of just to make sure that folks meet the sort of income eligibility requirements there. So I know that folks when they're in school might have different sort of income situations, but there is a pretty rigorous check at that early initial income verification to make sure that folks are sort of meeting the income targets that are required to be met for this program, whatever we determine those to be. So generally speaking, we have 2 years of data that we go for that, or at least the city of Portland has 2 years of data that they look at for that initial verification. I think it would be pretty hard to game the system considering that. We don't hear of any examples of that. And again, I think that there is kind of the purpose of this is to allow for that upward mobility.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wendland. Councilor Burdick.
So how long has Portland been doing this?
That is a good question. I'm going to defer to MIG. I'm not exactly sure how long they've had this rolled out.
Hi, this is Kate. Hello, everyone. I am also not sure of the answer to that. I know it's been around for a while just because we've been doing kind of research in this area for many years. At least, I would say at least 5 years, but I can do some quick research on their website to see if it's available online, but I don't know. I don't know if Matt knows.
No, I'm not sure. I think, yeah, 5 or more years, it sounds like, but we can check.
Okay, so not very long, really.
Not
to be able to
forever,
get good data from it. And then I guess I'm concerned a little bit about staff implementation and staff time. It sounds like this is an onerous process. And we don't have a big staff. Portland has a pretty big staff.
Yeah, they have an entire housing bureau that does this as part of, their sort of bailiwick. So
We would have a housing shed. Is that the?
yeah, and that, it is kind of the more of the levers and sort of the more checks and sort of, the more complicated this could be, the more staff time would be required to administer it. And particularly if we were talking about like annually checking for incomes and things like that. So.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Raff.
Is there evidence that the current mechanisms that we have in place or have planned to put in place to support homeownership are not working?
Well, we don't necessarily have anything specific to homeownership. A lot of the strategies in the HPS, yeah, I mean, this is one that is specific to homeownership, I guess is the answer. So there's a lot of different strategies that can touch on rentals or different sort of, there's a wide variety of strategies in the HPS right now. But yeah, we do not have anything specifically oriented towards this, and this was a need that was identified in the HNA.
But a project like the Habitat, I mean, that's what we're supporting, that is what we're doing to support homeownership,
Yeah.
right?
The things that we're currently doing is like, are you hearing of evidence that the things we're currently doing aren't working, so therefore we need other tools?
Well, we certainly are hearing from Habitat that this would be helpful. I'm not sure that we're hearing that it's anything that the city has done to facilitate that project overall, which is going towards homeownership in some ways. So we're not talking about what's in the HPS, but just that sort of partnership and the work that we've done for that. I think it's safe to say that that's been fairly successful. I don't think they would say that's not working necessarily. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And is I mean, for certain with the Habitat project, I mean, one of the great benefits of it is it does provide a homeownership opportunity to families who would otherwise not be able to probably afford, a home in Lake Oswego given the values. So we're just through supporting that Habitat's project, working to achieve that goal of the HNA. I wonder do we have any, can you kind of give us an idea when we look at a family that's making 80%, AMI, let's take a family of 4, what is that sales price that's affordable to them? You guys have that?
I guess this is based on the city's median income, so or median home price. So I'm not sure I have that on the top of my head, but we could probably calculate it pretty quick.
You got to like match it up, or trying to match the person in a certain income bracket with what's affordable, and just our market rate is going to be not affordable to,
right?
Or if it is, it's a teeny, sliver. So you're looking more at sub projects like a Habitat project that's for ownership, and I don't know of anyone else doing a subsidized for ownership project other than Habitat, who's providing these units, because anything on the market in our community, it seems like it's going to be outside the reach of someone making 80% AMI.
I'm figuring it out right now for you, Joe.
Yeah, I don't have a calculator right now, but yeah.
I think one of the problems I have is that there's not really any data. Oh, wait. There's not a lot of data to say if and. I mean, kind of when you're looking at whatever it was under the current program, $980,000, and the income at $200,000. I mean, that's, sorry. I mean, it's not even like close to what I would consider. I guess I look at it the other way too, is the value. You're saying $325 a month. That would be the savings on the property tax, and that would be the value of the house not the land, correct? And so-
Right, yeah, it could be, yeah, somewhere around that, yeah, 325, 300, yeah.
Right.
So just to clarify, we are proposing that this would be available for folks that are earning 80% of area median income or less. Just generally speaking, when we talk about like the cost of a housing unit that would be available at that price, Jessica has just quickly calculated to be something $624,000 or so price unit. So
No, that's 80% of the sales price, Jessica, not 80% of AMI.
yes, not but
80% of AMI is going to be somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000.
Yeah,
For the
affordability,
structure.
sales, yeah.
yeah, so we'd have to sort of, for whatever reason, probably frame this in whatever terms that equates to in the city's median home sale price, because that's how this is structured to relate to that for some reason. But
Yeah, so we'd have to make it even lower.
yes,
Right,
yes.
it'd have to be like 30% of the city's median home sales price, or, because the city's home sale price, you said, was 860 or something like that. Anyway, let us not get too
780,
deep
yeah.
on the math,
And-
that with a numerator and denominator, we don't know.
Right. Well,
Generally
the-
speaking, though, we have vast, so first of all, there's a lot of ability for us to talk about these details when we would theoretically be adopting this. So, we're not really phrasing this as definitely do Holte. It's more of an evaluate strategy. So we can work through those details, target the exact AMIs that we're hoping to target with this. And there is flexibility to do that here. The mechanism itself is probably more of, the sort of question here, but I think that it is certainly possible to target those lower incomes, regardless of how we phrase it as AMI or as something, within the city's, median home price.
Right. Well, and there is the question too, and this came up at the task force, and it's kind of, the opposite kind of what Councilor Wynn was saying, someone that moves up, which is great, buys and moves up and out. But you have people who don't and who are receiving the tax break, and then this is just a cliff at year 10. And then all of a sudden they're on the hook for an additional, hundreds of, that's going to be a problem. And so that came up, I know, as part of the discussion too, about how you work through. It seems like an odd program to me. I think it should kind of phase in or something, because otherwise that's tough for a low-income family to all of a sudden be like, well, by the way, next month, $500, that's huge.
Yeah, I think, it's worth pointing out that with something like Habitat for Humanity, they do build in the property tax itself for their calculation of what a person can afford to spend on housing. So that's something that, would be something that they would account for in the overall sort of structure of that sort of housing unit. But, this does get at, it wouldn't be necessarily within their reach anymore, right? So it would have to sort of be in a different level. But yeah, I think the other thing, though, is that this sort of, allowance for that income mobility could sort of mitigate some of this issue. And I think that's kind of, again, goes to the structure of the program, that it is designed not as a permanent solution, but just as kind of a, not a stopgap, but at least a temporary sort of amount of assistance to get, folks into the home ownership game in a way that would, again, help out that sort of generational wealth building component.
Yeah, and I think everyone's very supportive of the home ownership opportunities, for certain. I think and maybe this is a program, as we're working through other parts of the strategy, like continued public-private partnerships like we have with Habitat, this is something we move more towards the long term to look at down the road, as we let some of these other more urgent strategies materialize and see how things go, and how their kind of sales of their current project, take off, and what families are able to serve through those. I don't know, I'm kind of hearing questions from the council on this in general.
Go ahead.
Oh, don't fight.
No, I would concur. I think also, I'm not hearing that Portland has had this even in place for 10 years, so we're not even seeing what happens at that point and what's the impact. So I'm not seeing, for me, I think there's potential, but I'm not seeing enough data, and I'm also very concerned as how it would work in our community. So I want to keep, the door open for exploring options, maybe even bringing this back, but I'm not sure right now I'm comfortable with putting it into the plan itself.
I concur.
Yeah, I'd prefer, like you all said, to see what's happening, what we're currently doing, and seeing the effects of it before you start throwing the kitchen sink at everything. So
Okay. Thank you all. Councilor Afghan.
A quick clarification, we did learn that it's been around since 2012, the program. So,
That's helpful.
Yeah, so it has been around for more than 10 years. And yeah, I think Portland actually has a cap. So they generally only apply this to like 500 properties at once, or I think it's 500 at least. But anyway, they do have a cap and they hit the cap.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for that information. Councilor Afghan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director, what's the definition of home ownership? Does that include condos, townhomes?
Yes, it does. Home ownership could include those things, but the whole T program does allow for the city to set certain criteria. So for instance, the city of Portland requires a minimum 3-bedroom unit. So we wouldn't expect to extend, and by the way, I confirmed that $860,000 is the median sales price in the city of Lake Oswego, which at 80%, that would allow a sales price of $688,000. So we wouldn't want that to apply to, say, like a studio apartment. So the city could set criteria of a minimum size or a minimum bedroom for the home.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. How I see this is there's a whole population that are not making a whole lot of money, but this will enable them to get into a home ownership. And when we talk about home ownership, I'm looking at condos and townhomes that are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and that little $200, $300 delta will make their life easier to get into a home ownership and have a roof over their head. So I'm very supportive of exploring this option. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Councilor Mboop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, I'm having some internet problem away from some remote area. Yeah, but I concur with my fellow Councilor Afghan. I think I support that too.
Thank you, Councilor Mboop. Councilor Corrigan, what do you think?
Well, my concern is that it sounds like there are a lot of unknowns, and it sounds like it is administratively burdensome. And my concern about it is that I'm not sure it's ready for prime time here. And I would really rather see our focus be on things that will yield more immediate and powerful results.
Thank you, Councilor Corrigan. So what I'm kind of hearing is there's some support for it, but not majority immediate support. Would everyone be okay if it was in the strategy, but in the longer term, something to be considered in the long term by a future? No, you don't even want that. No.
If you're talking 325,000, go on Zillow and pull up anything for sale under $325,000, and I don't think you're going to find much in Lake Oswego. I think this is nice maybe for a specific development that might happen if we had the space and all the things lined up, which the current Habitat for Humanity project was a very lucky situation because everything kind of landed correctly. I don't think we have a lot of other opportunities in Lake Oswego for another project. So I agree with my fellow councilors who feel that there's so much more in the housing production strategies that we should be spending our time on, and I don't think there's really a huge opportunity for this. And I mean, I love Habitat for Humanity. I think they've done great work. I mean, I met, I think his name is Millard Fuller, who started this 35 years ago and saw lots of different projects, and it's fabulous. But I think there's that aspect of home ownership, and then there's also other incentives from state and federal government that you can get when you're at that low income level. You can get other assistance in other ways. And I think locally we need to ensure that we have the tax base. And I don't like the administrative part because it's just one more burden. I'd rather have our staff working on better policies and better things.
Well, we have a really a great plan that's been put together, and there's a lot of items in it, and we have to pick and choose because we can't do all the items at once anyway. So what I'm kind of hearing is let's, you know, set this one aside, and it's not a bad idea, but that, you know, it would need some work, and how we even deal with the issue of low income but high wealth. You know, what do you do with that individual? How do you qualify someone in that boat? You know, so I kind of agree with the initial assessment that this would be a low impact thing, and I think we have more high impact strategies that we could focus on in the first years. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. All right.
Great. Thank you for the clear direction there. I guess with that, I'll hand it back over to Kate to move forward at the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Eric, and I will re-share my screen. There we go. All right, so next we're just going to do a pretty brief overview of the remainder of the draft housing production strategy, and just kind of run through the strategies that are in there and sort of how they're organized. And a lot of this material you've seen in previous agenda packets, and discussed at previous work sessions. So there weren't a lot of changes to sort of the basic content of the strategies, but there are a few details added here and there, reorganized, a little bit more discussion about the sort of implementation timeline, and then some additional pieces about supporting fair and equitable housing outcomes and how the city would monitor progress over time in, you know, meeting the goals of the housing production strategy. So you can dig into those details in the packet if you would like. But so the first set of strategies is, and just to point out, we've done sort of a reorganization of the strategies to really emphasize the sort of category of housing need that each of these strategies is intended to address, and sort of the primary category of need. So many of these strategies can kind of hit on multiple categories, but this was, we thought, a helpful way of kind of framing a lot of these strategies and what they're intended to result in. So the first category is just general housing production and supply. So this is just, you know, the city, we know that the city needs to produce a certain number of additional units over the next 20 years to meet the needs identified in the housing production, or excuse me, in the housing capacity analysis. And so these are the strategies that would primarily work towards achieving increased supply overall. So within this category are the code audit and amendments strategy, removing and reducing minimum parking requirements, which, as you all know, is kind of on a separate track, and it's related to a state mandate that's not necessarily associated with the HPS, but it's kind of also feeds into housing, has benefits for housing production as well. And then rezoning land is the third strategy in this category. The next category is related to increased housing choices. So this category is really about, you know, making sure that the housing supply meets a full range of needs and preferences. And this includes things like smaller units for smaller households, opportunities for folks to age in place, and, you know, be able to access housing that has increased accessibility, and other types of, you know, filling out that kind of broad spectrum of housing needs. So in this category, we have the accessible design incentives or mandates strategy, and that's framed as an evaluate strategy because it's really something that would need further discussion and refinement as part of the implementation of the HPS. Evaluating the multiple unit property tax exemption, or MUPD. And I do want to put a pin in that one because we will be discussing, I have some questions for you and be discussing that after we go through the rest of the strategies. Pre-approved plan sets for accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and then modifying system development charge fee schedule to kind of scale those fees based on the size of the unit, so that they're lower fees for smaller units and then kind of scaled fees for larger units. All right, and then the next set of strategies is affordable housing for lower income households. So you'll see this category has the most strategies under it, just because this is a pretty significant need here and elsewhere, and kind of the city is looking to sort of leverage all of the tools that it can to address this issue. So one is already complete, already adopted by you all, the nonprofit low-income housing tax exemption. So that one is already done. The next one is a low-income rental housing tax exemption, which sort of has somewhat overlapping purpose, but is a little bit more broadly applicable and has sort of different criteria, but that's recommended for consideration to kind of supplement the adopted exemption. Public-private partnerships for affordable housing, that's really kind of continuing the work that the city's already doing to support those partnerships and potentially, taking further actions to support those partnerships. Using tax increment financing or urban renewal to support affordable housing development, and then conducting an affordable housing preservation inventory. And then the last category is really just kind of something that didn't exactly fit into any of the other categories, which is the fair housing policy and education strategy. And even though this doesn't necessarily fit into any of the other strategies and doesn't sort of directly address housing production, it would support a more equitable implementation of all the housing strategies that are recommended for the HPS. So next, we do want to focus briefly on the multiple unit property tax exemption. And then, of course, if folks have questions or comments about any of the other strategies, we can also discuss those. But so going back to the MUPD program, this is something that we discussed at the last meeting with you and the Planning Commission. And the recommendation that came out of that meeting was to consider adoption of the MUPD program or further evaluate the adoption of the MUPD program, but kind of focus it on promoting or supporting, encouraging housing that includes accessible design features. So there's kind of an overlap with that accessible design strategy or accessible housing strategy, and or focusing it on moderate income housing units. So kind of filling the gap between the sort of more affordable, lower income housing units that are would be supported, for example, by the nonprofit low income tax exemption, and then sort of market rate development. So that's kind of that middle range of incomes that we often hear are very difficult to, it's difficult to produce housing units within those income ranges. And it's also, a very significant need in the community. So, and just to remind you, the MUPD program, this is multiple unit, so middle housing and multifamily development would be potentially eligible. It's a 10-year tax exemption, kind of similar to the Holte in that way. And it's a pretty flexible program that the city would be able to kind of shape based on, it's the objectives that you think are most important. So for example, if you think accessible design is the most important or one of the most important criteria or objectives to achieve with this program, you could kind of focus it in that way. You could focus on income. Other cities make it more broadly available in terms of income levels, but they really focus on sort of geographic areas. So say they want to support, more transit availability or more housing with access to transit corridors. That's another way that it can be focused. You could also, you could apply other eligibility criteria as well. But that's the recommendation, accessibility or moderate income. And just wanted to see what your thoughts are sort of about the MUPD in general, but also specifically about these recommendations.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate. Questions on the MUPD? I guess we'll start. I have two questions. One, I guess it comes back to this income question, because it seems to me that with the costs the way they are, because most of the incentives, the other incentives that are available out there, right, are going to be for units at 80% AMI or less, right? If it's metro, well, there's no more metro housing bond, but if there was more money available through that, that's what it's going to be. Same with, federal resources, it's all at that target. So if we start getting to the 80-120 and the only incentive is this, I mean, it's not enough. I mean, they're not building it, right? So, and again, it's us going through the effort of putting the program together that's really a tool, but if it's the only tool in that category, I would think. So that's my question. Are there other incentives? Because right now we've given a property tax right, to a market rate, and they still can't get it built. Market rate, high, top of the market. So I'm just having trouble understanding how this incentive provides middle housing.
Well, I guess if
Yeah.
we're talking about middle housing, that might be a little more specific of a conversation.
income
but
housing.
Middle income housing, okay. Do you want to handle that one, Kate? I don't know if you have any response there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good comment. I can't say that I know the answer in terms of, is this a viable approach specifically in like Oswego? We did work with our economist, Johnson Economics, on this, on the analysis of these strategies, and their input was that it could potentially be viable. But yeah, it's a really good question as to whether this would be enough to achieve that type of development. I don't know, Matt, if you want to jump in.
I mean, I would just echo that. I mean, what we heard from our economist is that it is potentially viable. I don't actually think this one's a big lift from an administrative or staffing perspective. I think it's a question of whether or not you want to put this out there as an opportunity for somebody to come along and take advantage of. You're right, it's not going to like result in a huge amount of housing being built, but you don't have many other incentives in place related to this range of incomes and sort of that set of households. So I just think do you want to put it out there as an opportunity for folks? A lot of these are opportunistic. They're not gonna happen unless somebody comes along and applies for the exemption and has a project where it can be used. So that's how I would look at it. Do you want to create the opportunity, or are you more concerned about the costs or the other, issues associated with implementing it? I just look at a lot of these as somewhat opportunistic. They're not going to solve all your problems, but they might help get some housing built for a group that otherwise isn't going to have a lot of opportunities. So.
Right. Does it apply to existing housing as well? Could it?
I'll look at our report and see if we say. I can't think off the top of my head.
It just seems like new housing, it's going to be impossible, again, to build new housing, even with a full tax exemption that's affordable to a family making between 80 and 120% AMI. It just doesn't pencil out.
The numbers don't, the numbers
just not going to pencil out, unfortunately. My second question was just about what is accessible design features? I mean, when you craft a program like this, what does that mean?
Well, we would need to define that. There are a lot of different standards that have been very, that have been enumerated in a lot of detail. So there's universal design, there's ADA, of course, there's a lot of different standards. So we would be able to choose that. There's no requirement that we do it one way or the other. So we would be able to choose sort of the level of accessibility that we're hoping to promote. But yeah, generally, we have heard, folks from the advocacy community, sort of stating that there is a need for universal design and sort of more of these units that have been sort of developed at sort of a higher level of accessibility than ADA would require.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
But how,
And I will just, there was a question before whether or not this applies to existing development.
Yeah.
So it can be applied to, it can be offered to existing housing that is converted to meet the eligibility criteria. So that is a potential with this.
So that could be a part of a preservation strategy.
It could.
I know we have the preservation on there. I don't know what the strategy around preservation is. It's listed as one of the medium-term things, but.
Yeah, and I guess that's just a little bit of background on like how we got here. I think we originally had, not recommended this strategy, but after thinking about how to better incent accessible units, or some of those sort of what we refer to as workforce housing, 80 to 120% of AMI units, we did see that this has enough flexibility to allow us to sort of at least attempt to target that. Market-wise, there's more refinement needed and more, research to make sure that that's going to be used, but there is enough flexibility within this program to kind of get at those, not just affordability potentially. So.
Councilor Afghan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director, what AMI are we assuming right now? What's the value?
Median income?
It's in the appendix.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like $120,000 roughly.
120,000.
Roughly,
About.
very roughly.
Yeah.
Understood. Here's my thoughts. I am definitely in favor of exploring HOLTE, HOLTE and MOLTE, if those are the right acronyms. Definitely, my vote is explore. But at the same time, it needs to be practical. So we can work this backward, meaning if we're assuming $120,000 AMI and assume what kind of a mortgage that person would qualify for, and if we assume $300 a month in tax credit, what kind of a mortgage they would qualify for, and then look at how many homes, how many properties we have that is within that range, then we have an idea of how impactful this program would be. If this is going to be 5 to 10 properties across the entire Lake Oswego, then we need to put our effort someplace else. But if it is 100, 200, then I think the conversation is different. So when I say I'm in favor of exploring all of these options, there needs to be some logic to it as well. So that with the 120,000, I think we should do a quick calculation and see how many properties are in Lake Oswego that actually qualifies for this type of programs before we spend too much effort in going that direction. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Any other questions, comments on the whole unit? What do y'all think about their asking you? You know, does this kind of fall in the same category as the?
I think it does. I mean, I think there's bigger fish that we can be spending our time on.
Well, yeah,
not that anything on here is a bad idea.
That's right. They're all good ideas.
But it's the bandwidth of the two people that are sitting, giving the presentation. That's our workforce on this, and their time is extremely valuable, and we've got a huge list ahead of them already. So I'm just worried about being spread too thin.
Yeah, when I went down the list, as you, Kate, went through, all those, and this is really helpful that this has been such an iterative process with the council, with the planning commission, and with the housing production task force, because it's really let us rethink, and I'm glad that we're bringing some of these back to rethink them again and see where they could fit in, because I could see this multi fitting in. I don't think new construction just doesn't seem like economically a viable option, but I could be wrong. I mean, obviously more work would need to be done, but for preservation, now that could be something. If you have an existing thing that we're trying to preserve, because some of that could definitely be in that 80 to 120% range, but they might need the resources to, maintain it instead of just selling it. There's units like that in town, and I mean, I could see that being a benefit. But it seems we go through the list. I see these to me, these items that seem like the most impactful, or ones that we're on the verge of accomplishing, like the low-income rental housing. I mean, that's easy, right? We're on the verge of doing that. The code audit, the parking minimums, the rezones, the continuing public-private partnerships, and the TIF. I kind of listed those as the top, and that's a lot. Like, that's probably years of work, just those.
Yeah, we're signing up for 6 years of work in total. So that's the requirement.
6 years.
Yeah.
You're both young.
That is 6 years, yes. And then some medium, we had some good medium term things, which is the preservation, the STCs, and the fair housing. And I mean, that seems like a body of work. And then all these other strategies, not that they're good, but by the time we're done with these, I mean, it's gonna be time to reevaluate. It's gonna be a different council. There could be different tools. It just seems like we don't need to wring our hands too much around the details of these, some of these strategies, because we're not going to do them. They might be in the 2030s or something.
Yeah, and a lot of them are phrased as evaluate as well. So again, there's a sort of less of a commitment for those, of course. But yeah, I guess just to put this in a little bit more context, this is a property tax exemption that would apply to multifamily development for the most part, multiple units. So generally it will be a little bit more bang for your buck in terms of what you get for a given project on a given property, even if there are like 5 multifamily developments, that's much better than just 5 units, I suppose, for Holte. So anyway, the administrative burden, I think we would expect to be less for this as well.
Yeah, no, it's really good that you brought it back, Councilor Burdick.
Yeah, I just want to concur, just when I'm looking at kind of the timeline, what we already have listed in our priorities, I agree with the list that the mayor kind of laid out, and I'm just looking at bandwidth. And so I just want to reiterate, I think we need to be careful to not keep adding onto it and really say, what are our priorities? And let's start focusing and get those priorities moving and done. I'm looking at rezone land, which, not till 2027. I'm like, I'd like to see that started sooner. Might not be possible. But when I keep hearing some of these other things added, I'm like, that's something that I think we could get more bang for the buck for than some of these others. And down the road, again, things might change. It might make sense. I'm all for doing things that we can do to help get generational wealth. But I'm not sure right now that those are what we need, again, right now. In a few years, reevaluate. Let's look at it. I don't want to shut the door on anything permanently because things change. But again, I do, looking at this timeline and so forth, I'd say I'd rather have your time, like, let's get some of these implemented so we can really start having that impact.
Yeah, and we do expect that the rezoning would probably take the biggest chunk out of the deficit, and have received some suggestion from DLCD that it might be wise to prioritize that sooner, just so that we can evaluate it prior to the next sort of 6-year cycle of doing this again, so we have a sense of how much we're actually getting done
I would
sooner.
support moving that up if it's workload feasible.
Same here, yeah. And we're talking about commercial zoning, right?
Not exclusively, no. I mean, we're talking about rezoning in a broad sense.
Oh, well, I think definitely the low-hanging fruit in the rezone is commercial areas where housing makes a ton of sense, where it's just not currently allowed. We're thinking of light industrial, we're thinking of, and some of it ties in maybe to the TIF strategy, where like in Foothills, Southwest Employment Area, and little areas like Westlake Grove that are just tiny areas where we've already had to rezone because housing is what the market's calling for there, and it's not allowed, It just seems like some of the stuff like that seems like the low-hanging fruit. Broader rezoning obviously would be a much larger community conversation.
Thank you for that clarification. I concur.
Councilor Windlet.
So holistically, when we're looking at everything on the housing strategies, because I guess we're coming up to the end point now, pretty close.
This will be the last study session
Right.
before the hearing, yeah.
So holistically, I kind of, we put a lot of, I'd like to know, we put a lot of demands on implementing this housing production strategy. I mean, obviously it was given us as a present by this state legislature, and we get to deal with this as a city. But I kind of would love to know how we're going to staff all of this. What's the increased costs of doing all this planning? Do we have this in the budget? What are we working on? What are we not working on while we're doing this that might be a higher priority for our community than working on the housing production strategies? In other words, are we missing something? I don't want this to be such a huge burden that we're missing other things. And I don't know whether I'm not asking for an answer today, but I guess holistically, I think we have to say, okay, this is a huge piece of work, body of work. Do we have the staffing to do everything? Do you have the resources from your perspective to get this work done while doing all the other work that I think we need to have our operational efficiency at peak, if that makes sense. And so I'm just curious, now that we've been in the thick of this, I know, Eric, you had probably some time away, and you were very happy not to be thinking about housing production strategies for a little bit, or hopefully you weren't thinking about it, but now you're back in the swing of things full steam. And I guess you've been the mouthpiece to this, but and doing a lot of the higher level work. But my question is, what is this going to cost us from the standpoint of resources and time, and what are we giving up? So anyway, just a thought for the future.
So let me just take a first stab and then look at Jessica and Eric. Some of it overlaps with other council priorities, which is great news, right? You have had a council priority as a group for the last 2 years about doing a code audit and an audit of the development process.
Right.
So the good news is there's a great deal of overlap there. I do think that it's almost a question more for all y'all about what would you rather be spending your long-range planning time on rather than asking staff that question, if that makes sense. I do think tree code, for example, is another long-range planning process that you've asked to do that will take a lot of their time. But where I was going to go is we can, when we bring the strategy back to you for adoption, we can give you sort of an estimate of how fast, and I hope that they've done this already, how fast we can implement this with existing resources, because I think that's how we need to think about it rather than thinking that we have to add resources. Our timeline ought to be driven by the assumption that we're going to do it with existing staff and existing budget.
Right. Okay,
in other
but
words,
then-
not substituting the state's priorities for your local priorities. So that if you want to do local priorities, that's when we have the conversation about any additional resources needed, if I'm making any sense. That we don't put the state's needs ahead of our own.
Right, but I think we put off I think housing production strategy is nice, but it's 2,000 units over the next 20 years. So that's not going to be a huge significant change to our inventory. I mean, in all honesty, I mean, our population change is not huge. I think when I look at the cost of housing, which affects probably 97% of our population, I'm looking at the costs of going through the planning and production of building in this city, remodels, that type of thing, codes, things that we can make more efficient, which we're going to have a much better
Yeah, but that's
return on
part
our
of the
investment.
strategy. Again, that's part of the strategy, right? Is that look at the development review process.
Right. But
That's
I
in
don't-
here.
But I understand that, and you threw it back to us, but I'm going to throw it right back to you. I don't know what everybody's job is, and if they're doing it, I don't know timelines.
Of course they're doing their jobs.
Our permits getting, it was a nice try, but it's right back in your box. Our permits getting processed fast enough? Do we have enough horsepower in doing the inspections we need, or whatever else that is in your world, do we have the resources to do? And is there a compromise that we are taking by not doing some things, by concentrating on this? And that's all I'm saying, because I think the quality of work of everything that we've done in this housing production strategy has been exceptional. You guys have done a fabulous job. We expect nothing less, but it's been time. And I just want to make sure that we're allocating. So that's all I'm saying.
Sure.
Yeah. And we can rest, easy knowing that this is this remains a top community priority. When we had our board and commission summit, housing, top community priority. We have coming up later in the meeting, we did a community survey on the ballot thing, and the single item when people were asked, open-ended, what's your top concern? Housing affordability. That was the single most, responded thing. So I think it's good the resources we are dedicating to this effort, because it is a top community priority and it's a goal of the council, and so it's we could do more, we could do, but.
We have heard, from the residents, we have a survey data that shows that they support all of these strategies as well, specifically.
Yes.
So,
well, what does everyone, so just to put it out there again, I kind of went through a list, because again, I think we have some, Mr. Olson said we need a 6-year work plan, and kind of throughout these items, the code audit, the parking, minimums being eliminated, the rezoning, which we hope we can maybe move up, the low income related to commercial specifically. Like maybe that even gets chunked up. Like we look at the low hanging fruit rezones, which is the commercial areas, at first, and then down the road, look at a broader, because that's a big conversation, the low income rental housing, tax abatement, the public-private partnerships, the tax increment financing, those being the near-term, top priority things.
of course, the TIF project is kind of happening as well, as another sort of council priority that's going on.
Exactly. As we take up Foothills urban renewal, then it's just a matter of weaving that in. And then in the kind of set behind those is these, as is laid out, the preservation, SDCs, fair housing, and everything else. I mean, there's nothing, we're not hearing concerns about anything, but putting them more in a longer term bucket that's going to come up in a different council in a different time, when then we can reevaluate what would have then been an accomplishment of a lot of work and seeing like, okay, well, where do we go from here? Instead of trying to figure out the roadmap right now. I mean, how does everyone feel about putting a plan forth like that?
I think we're sticking to Martha's plan during goal setting. Don't have too much.
I see 3 thumbs
Get
up on the
stuff done.
screen. Okay, yeah, that's right.
And just to close the loop, if MUPD is in, it's in the long-term bucket.
Yes, and maybe as a part of this preservation.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know if there's any specific thoughts on MUPD. I know we heard some, I guess, differing opinions on MUPD, but overall, is it something that we would like to leave in the mix and put it as a long-term strategy?
Or at least get some more feedback during the public hearing process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
But put it in as a longer term.
But it seems like it's a longer term, because again, we just can't, we could put it shorter term, but then we're knocking something else out,
Right.
So looks like Kate has a comment.
Oh, yes, please, Kate.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask if it would be helpful to share the implementation timeline that we included in the draft report, just for visual reference for this discussion.
Yeah, I would appreciate it if you shared that, actually, Kate.
Sure.
Is that the table 2? Yeah, it's a good.
So I guess just wanted to point out that there are a number of these that are kind of already happened or happened anyway. Remove or reduce minimum parking requirements is kind of, required to do that by the end of the year. The modify SDC schedule is something that we had, thought of as a longer term strategy, but there is other work happening next year. So we are, acknowledging that. Public-private partnerships are kind of just ongoing. So it's not like we just pick up and have to focus on something immediately. TIF and urban renewal is kind of happening relatively independent of this, but, we should coordinate. But, it might look a little bit more daunting than it will be. But that being said, the rezone land strategy is going to be long and complex. So, yeah.
So I guess what I'm hearing them saying is we'd like to have moved that up and move MUPD out.
And to phase it,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then moving other things out a little further, like the ADU set in the long term, design incentives and things just longer term. Not that any of these, again, are bad ideas, but knowing the high priority that housing is in the community, we want to do the most impactful things first, and we want to be able to focus on them with good intent and, make the production happen, Because a lot of these, again, they're good things, but they're kind of, we know the impact is going to be minimal.
So again, just for clarity, so when we say push out MUPD, do we mean leave it in but longer term strategy? Okay, not just push it out.
Yes.
Right. Sounds good. All right, this is very helpful, and I appreciate the attention to our workload and sort of demands that we have as staff. So.
Well, it's critical, and you've done just a great job. I just want to thank you and Director and your team, and then the Housing Production Strategy Task Force. It's been a great group to work with, the Planning Commission as well. There's been lots of good voices, and we're going to need to continue. I mean, this needs to be a continuous community conversation that we keep coming back to and evaluating the efficacy of this work, and then things are always changing and how different programs are coming up. And so hopefully different tools, even regionally, we're looking at more tools for housing, maybe even next, May, something on the ballot there. So things are always changing.
You could even see like privately initiated rezonings and things like that kind of force us to get started faster anyway. Right. So, yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
How about you take one more item, and then take a break? I think it'll be more logical.
Let me see what's next.
The next one is the honorarium conversation.
Okay.
I think it's a short item.
Okay, well. Okay, next item. Well, and it's a wastewater too. It's a hard one to talk about before a bathroom break. I know. Okay, next item on the agenda is item 10.1. This is a wastewater treatment facility request for proposals honorarium. Joining us is Stefan Broadus, Director of Special Projects. Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me, and I will take the not so subtle cue to be somewhat succinct here with this item. And so again, thank you for having me here to talk about the upcoming procurement for the treatment plant. Very quick background here, recent background. In October of last year, we amended our agreement with our partner at the time to expand their scope from 60% to 90% deliverables. And then a few months later in January, they completed that scope of work to reach a 90% set. At that time, we then ended the progressive P3 approach that we were working with, and then evaluated different possible procurement vehicles to complete and deliver this treatment plant. Back in May, I presented to you the concept of a fixed price design, build, operate, maintain procurement method, at which point was approved, and the project team has been working on that since then. So that procurement, what we have crafted in that time, is a two-step procurement. The first of which is a request for qualifications, relatively low effort in order to prepare that from the proposers. The project team would review the submittals that we received, shortlist that down to 3, and invite those remaining 3 to submit a request for proposals, which will be a much more involved, much more effort-intensive process, at which point we will be asking for them to finish the design and include fixed pricing for construction of the facility, as well as long-term operations and maintenance. And so that brings us to the concept of an honorarium. When I think about this, I think about 2 basic questions. First of all, what is it? And second, why would we do it? So I'll take the first one first. What is it? As I just mentioned, we would have a 2-step procurement, the second of which would be a request for proposals in which we would expect to have 3 firms shortlisted. The top proposal that we receive, we would expect to enter an agreement with them to deliver the treatment plant. The other 2 proposals, the 2 that were complete but not selected, would then receive this honorarium payment. So the second question, why would we do this? So a couple of quick reasons. First of all, it is industry standard practice to do so for a project of this scale, for a project of this procurement type. It has become, over the past several years, industry standard, industry best practice to do so. Why else would we do it? Well, it promotes competition. So by lowering the bar and lowering the risk exposure in compiling a fully complete proposal, it encourages greater participation. So that can be from and including disadvantaged businesses, and it also should be noted that increasing just the overall number of participants that are interested in the project, which helps us get more competitive proposals. Also is, from an intangible perspective, it also sends a message of commitment to this project that we are fully committed to delivering this treatment plan. And so you'll see here the last bullet on this slide has to do with some dollar amounts. So I want to spend just a quick moment to explain those. The anticipated amount is a total of $250,000, so that would be 2 honorarium payments of $125,000 each to the second and third place proposals. The not to exceed amount is in the extremely unlikely scenario in which we receive 3 fully complete proposals and we decide to take the project in a different direction altogether, at which point not only would we pay an honorarium to the second and third place proposal, we would also pay that payment to the first place as well. So the math here is 125 plus 125 plus 250 to that top ranked proposal. Again, not anticipated, extremely unlikely, but I did want to go ahead and get that amount authorized in the event that that happens. And so moving on to next steps. So this Friday, we plan to issue the request for qualifications, step 1 of the procurement process. A couple of months later, we would then receive the qualifications from interested vendors. The project team would review those SOQs, statements of qualification that we received, and shortlist them down to 3. In December, we would issue our step 2 of the procurement, the request for proposals. And then in March, we would get those back. We would evaluate them. We would begin to negotiate with the top-ranked one. And the schedule shows us this time next year issuing that agreement and starting the project, moving forward with demolition, moving forward with final design, et cetera, to the point where 2028, the project is complete and receiving flows and treating sewage. So with that, I will open it up to any questions you may have.
Okay, questions for Mr. Bonas? No questions? Zoom questions? Well, it sounds like you've done a great job putting this forward. I think given, what we've been through in this project so far, this makes really good sense. And this is a critical project for the community, not something we want to mess around with. We want to ensure we get great competitive proposals. We're able to make good use of the work that we receive. And we demonstrate how serious this community is about this project, about our partnership on this project, and this seems like a good thing to move forward on.
I make a motion?
Yes, please.
Move to authorize the city manager to award honoraria payments to responsive proposals to the request for proposals for the wastewater treatment facility project not to exceed $500,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so motion made by Councilor Winland, seconded by Councilor Verdict. Is there any discussion? Councilor Reff.
So as I've been considering this for, I think, several weeks now, right? Maybe a couple months. I initially have not been a fan of this idea. You all know how I feel about the city taking care of every penny that we have and making sure that we're getting value for what we spend our money on, et cetera. I've recently decided that I think under the circumstances, there's value in this. And I want to make sure that I clearly set expectations for why I'm changing my mind. And it's because for the upfront cost of this honoraria,
Honoraria is the plural.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Honorarium is the singular, yes.
I want to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that the money that we're spending with the honorarium, the goal of this for people that are listening and wondering why we're doing this, and maybe they're feeling like I used to, of like, hey, you're just throwing money away. Why can't the city get great competitive bids on its own merit? Ultimately, what this will lead to, and I'm hoping that you can steer this in that direction, that by allowing firms to be more competitive, will actually save more money than the honorarium in the long run with whatever deal we make. So upfront cost to actually save more in the long run. So please stay 100% focused on that as we're going through this process. I want to make sure that when we do select a firm, that we can clearly identify the value that this upfront cost led to in the end. So, yeah, so.
Good point. Thank you, Councilor Raff. Councilor Mbu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am aware around the world, and I am not changing my mind. I think we have a lot of projects that we want to accomplish in the city, and while it makes sense, in what you're saying for an incentive, we are building a wastewater treatment plant, a modern one, and everybody is interested in bidding. And we all know that the people who will bid and win this thing are the people who to do this, and they've been doing it. I asked about this when we were discussing that around here, there've been wastewater treatment plant that were built, and they didn't use this kind of honoraria to satisfy people. Lake Oswego is a very attractive city and a very credible partner. We work with people who were not fair to us, and we decided not to pursue the development with them. And I think, it was fair. Everybody who come here will understand that too. So I still hold my position that I disagree, in giving our money to people who already have money, because they can build $600 million or more. They have the wherewithal to do that, and it's a business, and we are in a capitalist society. This is competition. You put your bid and you win or you don't win. So for me, it will be a waste of money. We have safe route to schools. We have, as a project, $250,000 is a lot of money, a lot, to get out there, because we just want this plant to be built. So I differ and I won't vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mboop. Councillor Winland.
I see it a little differently than my colleague who just got served coffee, it looks like. So I hope that, will you share some with us? Just kidding. I am in full support of this. I think I agree from my core values that you shouldn't have to do this, but we have to play the game. And I think what's more important is that we've already been through this dance once. And I think we need to show confidence to the marketplace that we are very serious about this project, that it is essential for our community to have this project, and that we want to give the best optimum circumstances to get the best competitive bids that we can. And so I'm in complete support of it, and really it's $250,000, and we can't spend this money elsewhere because this all comes out of this project. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't spend it on water pathways or anything else, wastewater pathways.
Pathways.
Or pathways, just pathways. So it's a cost of doing business. Unfortunate, this is how it is. But if you've done a major home remodel project, there are contractors out there that charge you $500 to do the estimate now. And if they get the job, they refund it in your price. If they don't, you just got an estimate. And so, not that that's swaying me, but it's a reality of life, I think, post COVID. So I'm in support of this.
Thank you. Okay, good points, everyone. Let's go ahead and call the roll, please. Ms. Linder.
Mayor Buck?
Aye.
Councillor Afghan?
Aye.
Councillor Winland?
Aye.
Councillor Verdick?
Aye.
Councillor Mboop?
Nay.
Councillor Rapf?
Aye.
And Councillor Corrigan?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-1.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Broadus. Thank you, everyone. Discussion. Let's go ahead and take a recess. we're back in order. We're going to have to steal the city attorney. Our next item on the, thank you, Ms. Osnack. Our next item on the agenda is, because we need you to review the comment procedure. We have this item 10.2. This is resolution 24-28. Resolution of the City Council submitting a measure to the voters at the November 5th, 2024 general election to allow a road safety project at the intersection of Stafford Road and Childs Road. We will start, we're going to have a public comment process and presentation. We'll start with a review of the comment procedure by Ms. Osnack.
Thank you, Mayor Book, members of the council. This is just a slightly different procedure than we normally use. This is not a public hearing, but we, obviously, you all felt it was important to allow public comment. And so just as with the normal public comment period, anyone who wishes to testify has up to 3 minutes. And the purpose is to provide comment. And as you all are probably aware, it's in a public hearing, oftentimes there'll be back and forth. But in public comment, typically that is not the case. You all are receiving information in order to help you make your decision on the matter.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Osnack. And we're going to start with the staff presentation with Ms. Thiesing.
And as Ms. Thiesing's coming up, Mayor Buck, members of the council, I just wanted to set the stage for you all in the public. Childs Road is adjacent to Stevens Meadows Park, which is owned by the city. In 2018, Clackamas County identified the intersection of Stafford and Childs Road as unsafe and began designing fixes. In 2021, Lake Oswego voters amended Chapter 10 of the city's charter. And Chapter 10 prohibits the city from constructing or allowing the construction of roads for cars on any portion of Stevens Meadows. At the request of council, the city manager and I began the process of creating a ballot measure that would allow voters to decide whether to authorize the county project. Voters will be asked whether they wish to allow up to 0.2 acres of Stevens Meadows to be used for the county road project and up to 0.2 acres of Stevens Meadows to be used for a construction access road that is directly adjacent to the existing gravel access road that is the only road on the property and which the city uses to maintain the park. You'll now receive a presentation about the values that Lake Oswego voters bring to this particular issue.
Right, and we're going to, just my colleagues, we're going to, if it's okay with everyone, we're going to have the presentation comment period, and then we'll ask questions. Okay. All right, Ms. Thiesing. Thank you, Ms. Osnack.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, for having me this afternoon. I'm Madison Thiesing, the assistant to the city manager, and joined with me today is Michelle Knaus from DHM, who is our consultants for this project. As Ellen shared, this is the results from the polling in anticipation for whether the City Council would refer this ballot measure. So I'm going to just pass it off right away so that we can make the best use of time. But the background is, after we got council direction to explore the option of a ballot measure, we hired DHM to poll the community to gauge the interest of voter opinions, as well as Quinn Thomas to begin work on communications as well. And so we had just wrapped up polling recently, and so that's the information we're going to be sharing today. So I will hand it over to Michelle.
Great, thank you, Madison. Okay. So as Madison said, we're going to dive into some of the results from the survey we recently did. The purpose of the survey is to give you more information on how voters feel about this proposal, as well as understand what's their values and priorities as they're thinking about this issue, which hopefully will help you reach a decision that you're more comfortable with. We talked to 400 registered voters end of June and early July. We called some people and we texted some people to invite them to take the survey. That's because people have different preferences on how they want to talk to us. Some people will only take it online or on their phone, and some people want to talk to a live person. The survey took 12 minutes to complete. There is more data than we're showing you today, but in the interest of time and focus, we're focusing on the high-level results here. And we set quotas on a variety of demographics to help ensure the sample is representative of the voters. And with that, we'll go right on in. One of the first things we ask in most surveys is a sort of general warm-up question to test voters' mood. Is the city going in the right direction, or is it off on the wrong track? And here in Lake Oswego, a good majority, 61%, said that the city is headed in the right direction. And for me, at the very beginning, this is a very positive sign. For context, I'm going to show you statewide numbers for right direction over the past several years. When we ask people how they feel about the direction of the state, we haven't seen 61% in many, many years, and certainly the last 2 years, voter sentiment has been very sour. And that's particularly true, honestly, here in the metro region. So you in Lake Oswego at 61% right direction, that's a really resounding positive feedback from your residents. So I want you to just sort of take that as a starting point. And that's relevant because it's relevant to how they're going to interpret what you're putting forth to them. We also asked them open-ended question, what is the biggest issue facing the city of Lake Oswego? Again, they can say whatever they want. This is open-ended. 21% said something related to transportation. I'll get into the details of that in a little bit moment. But clearly the top issues are transportation, housing affordability, and growth. And again, I want to point out this is qualitatively different than many other cities in the region. When we do this in Portland, the top issues are homelessness, crime, affordability. So housing affordability is statewide a top issue, by the way, but in many, many communities, homelessness and crime are the top two. So it's not just that your voters are positive, but they feel, right, that gestalt, how are they looking at the city is quite a bit different than other cities in the metro region. And in fact, there's a handful of comments in there that say, we just don't want to be like Portland. And so that's a sentiment that, is vocalized by your voters as well.
So by having 5% poor leadership, does that mean 95% feel like it's excellent leadership? That's not a correlation.
Yes. We'd have to ask that question differently. But I will say that I usually get in any survey about this question, somewhere between 2 to 5% are going to say something about poor leadership. So again, that's honestly standard. Under that transportation bucket, I have here more of the specific topics, and we group them together so you can kind of see, as a whole, what are people concerned about. But the top comment that went in there was about traffic, roads and road maintenance, and then you have walkability, parking, bike lanes. And I just want to point out that this proposal then ties in to many of the top concerns that your voters have. Right? So again, that gives you a really good foundation. It's very different if I came in here and said, well, your voters' top priority is education. It's going to be a lot harder to drill up support for a proposal that is not aligned with their priorities, right? So that's where you're starting from, and all that is, I think, good context for evaluating this measure. All right. Next, I'm going to show you the results for the actual ballot measure. And I'm going to, just before I show that, I want to point out that you're going to see pairs of columns because we asked it twice. We did an initial ask, do you support this proposal? Then we gave them more information about it, and then we asked them again towards the end of the survey. So what you can see is where do people start and where do they tend to move to as they learn more about the issue. Okay. On the left there, you see all the text that we either read or showed people about the measure. I want to point out that it did specifically say that this amends the charter. And then we, asked if they would allow the county to do this, make this safety improvement using, in this case, 0.2 acres was the language we used for Stevens Meadows Park for the road construction. And what you will see is that that initial ask, just under 50% supported the measure. And you had about 1 in 4 opposed, but you had 1 in 3 who just didn't know. And when we gave them more information, and I'll show you more of that in the next few minutes, you had an increase in support to up to 76%. The movement, you largely see that from don't knows moving to support probably. And then, a little bit of a reduction there in opposition. So a few things to point out is normally we like to see numbers of 70% or higher support ahead of time like this, so that, you sort of have that buffer of as people in the community debate the issue, some people might change their mind. You want to have sort of a good buffer above, say, 50% to start with an issue, and so this is a strong position for the city. I'll also point out that you had 40% strongly supporting versus at the final ask versus 6% strongly opposing. That's also a very solid place because it's really hard to move people who are strongly opposed to an issue, right? And that's comparatively the ratio between those two is again very favorable for how the community feels. Just looking a bit, this shows in gray initial opposition in some demographic groups, and then in orange is opposition at the second informed ask. And I just want to point out that 2 of the groups most opposed to this measure also had that significant reduction in opposition, and that is your younger voters, voters of color. Opposition did not decline, I would say, in a statistically significant way among Republicans who also have higher levels of opposition. Okay, so next I want to go through a little bit about the ballot information that we shared with voters. There are 2 sections. The first section is going to present more neutral, informative information, and then we have the next section presents more persuasive information to support the measure. So here, I know the text is a little bit hard to read. We presented 4 information, statements about the proposal. 1 shared that an audit back in 2018 identified this intersection as a key priority area to improve safety, and that the county, has been working on the improvements for several years. The others talk about the feedback process, the fact that the county is going to pay the cost, and then the 4th statement about the size of the parcel. And so what you see is that the most positively received information was about safety, but also hearing about the getting feedback and that the county is paying had high levels of positive reception as well. Information about the size of the parcel had a lower positive reception. And sort of conversely then, I would say about 1 in 4 said that hearing about the 0.2 acres being used made them feel more negative. I'll also say that about 23% said that it was neither positive nor negative, sort of neutral. But in general, if there's a pause, it's going to be around the size of the parcel. We also asked them to consider what was most important to them when they're thinking about this issue and making their decision. And by large, the top priority was reducing traffic crashes. So again, safety was really important to people. Next, we shared a little bit of messaging statements with them. These have more persuasive statements. This is the full text. You have this in your packets. I don't want to go through it. I just wanted to point out that for ease of presentation in the next few charts, I'm going to use these shorthand descriptions of the messages, but there were a lot more words behind that. And this is to sort of let you have a reference to what the full text was. Again, when we asked people, is this a good reason to support the proposal? The voters said that messages around reducing accidents and messages that this is a good deal for the city were the best reasons to support the project. That second tier below the dotted lines, again, issues around responding to the community, safety for bicyclists. Those are also important to people, maybe at a second tier, but again, well over, at least 8 and 10 said, yes, this is a good reason to support the project. We provided them with a few opposition messages as well. And again, this sort of helps delineate the lines of what is not a good reason to, or, what might they be concerned about is more what I should say. So this helps us sort of try to figure out some of the top concerns that people might have. And so we looked at, the value of protecting natural areas, whether other solutions should be explored, and whether there just isn't, whether their benefits may not be enough given the compromise being made here. And so here, overall, those opposition messages were less persuasive to voters, although protecting natural areas rose to the top as something that they might consider a good reason to oppose the proposal. And I would say, just to point out, younger voters were particularly persuaded by the top two messages here, protecting natural areas and finding another solution. And that actually is the end of the data to show you. So just to sum up, overall, voters, I would say, are open to this issue, and there's a strong level of positive feelings in the electorate right now, and there's also a really healthy level of support that's existing in the community. We always would caution that support can go down as opposition to the proposal is discussed and disseminated in the community, but this is a very healthy position to start from.
Thank you so much.
Right.
So as we have the caption question summary drafted right now in your packet, this is what we are asking for council direction on whether to move forward with referral. One thing I do want to note before we dive into the conversation and questions is in this polling, we were using 0.2 acres for Stevens Meadow as the size of the project. Since polling did conclude, we re-examined the plans and realized that that square footage did not include the realignment of an existing access road driveway. So I do want to show this map so that we are crystal clear on what the project that we're talking about is. The pink line is where the right-of-way acquisition would need to be, proposed slope easement, and these are from Clackamas County. That's the 9,000 square feet, which equates to 0.2 acres. Currently, we have a gravel access road, and with the road realignment, the road construction, we would need to realign that driveway to connect with the road. So that is the grayed out area that you're seeing, which accounts to another 0.2 acres, which is why the change of the number when we're drafting the ballot language. Additionally, with that driveway, it's realigning what's already there, but it's also providing an access road during construction staging so that if we move forward with this, the county has places to put their equipment essentially during construction. The blue box surrounding that driveway, which is currently mapped out as a temporary construction easement, would not be what is long-term, the structure or the size limit we're talking about. It would just be that driveway. So I just wanted to note that change in the ballot language from what happened from when polling closed to what is now in front of council for consideration. With that as a next step, so if council chooses to refer this to voters following this meeting, the next step timelines would be that we are on a timeline directed by the elections process. So August 16th would be the last day that we could file. We will also have a challenge period from August. In August, we would then submit our communications material with support from DHM and Quinn Thomas, as I shared, our consultants who are doing communications. September 5th would be our last day to notice the election. September 9th would be the last day that anyone who would like to put in a statement in the voters pamphlet separate than the city information, that would be the last deadline for that. September to November, we would propose a public information campaign. So again, going through the state process, we would have politically neutral messaging from the city for information distribution. And then lastly, that takes us to November 5th being election day. So with that, it's just to show what, if council moves forward with the referral, this is what we would be looking at for the next 4 months as we wrap up. So with that, that is the end of our presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, we're going to do the comments.
Oh, excuse me, you were right.
And we just, Ms. Stevens, we have, you're the only one signed up for comments. So is that okay? Can you come on forward here? And I don't know if any of the rest of you want to provide comments, that's fine too, but she's the only one. So please come on forward. And then we'll do questions.
Thank you. Mayor Buck, members of the Lake Oswego City Council, both those of you in the room and those of you who I think are still with us. My name is Susan Stevens Hummel. Do not vote on Resolution 2428 until its factual errors, missed opportunities, and misleading omissions are fixed. In your meeting on May 21st, the city manager warned you against referring a measure to Lake Oswego voters that might fail. As now described, this one should fail. Among its problems, the current version 1 relies on half-truths in a survey of potential voters. 2, it understates the county's request for land by misreporting the size of Stevens Meadows. 3, it forecloses design changes to the proposed traffic project. 4, and it hinders public access to a city park. The idea behind the resolution is commendable, but the current product is flawed. Why risk it? Send it back and clean it up. Stevens supports traffic safety at the intersection of Childs and Stafford roads. Mayor, we came to your June roundtable and said as such. We also laid the groundwork for you, Clackamas County, and Metro to cooperate and make it happen. After the roundtable, the city manager's office promised Stevens a joint meeting to discuss the project design. My last email went unanswered. Time and money matter here, I recognize. But time is relative. You'll be cutting down old growth trees to help fish and traffic, which is both short-sighted and illogical. Are you aware the proposed slope easement calls for felling trees that are 5 feet in diameter? 5 feet in diameter. That's about 15 feet around. 15 feet. County engineers have ample skills to redesign a traffic project that fits within the footprint and intent of the conservation easement that Stevens placed on this land. The children in Lake Oswego, yeah, they deserve better from you. So do the drivers and the voters. I ask that Resolution 2428 be returned to the city manager and the city attorney for corrections and changes before you vote on it. If you do vote on it today, I recommend that you vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor Buck.
Okay, would you two like to come for questions? Anyone like to have any questions on this, on the ballot measure proposal? Councilor Verdict.
So can you go over exactly what, again, the land size that is going to be taken away, and if it goes through? Just so, because it sounds like there's kind of the gravel path, so a little clarification on that would be great. And then in terms of the construction area, so that gravel path, how is that going to impact the natural area? Are things going to stay on that gravel path? Is it going to be expanded? What's going to happen to that natural area? And then I have a question after that.
So the gravel path as proposed right now is about 9,000 square feet as well, or 8,000 square feet, which equates to 0.2 acres. The gravel path itself, there is an existing one. I don't have a pointer. Oh, excuse me. Right here, that is already intact right now. So we would be moving it from just over here. It would account to removing one more tree, is what we've heard from the county. And the second part of the question was, sorry.
You've answered it.
Okay.
Yeah, no. And is there any way around saving, I guess, and I don't think you can answer this because it's more of a county question, but again, is there a way to have that gravel pass so we're not getting rid of that tree?
We've asked that question repeatedly, and we've also asked the question about there's 4 other trees, 3 other large Dougs, and another tree. We've asked repeatedly whether they can save it, and they can by building a retaining wall, except they believe that the construction of the retaining wall will significantly damage the roots of the trees, and so we'll end up killing the trees anyway.
Can I just clarify too? So this is the existing driveway?
No, the black line is the relocated driveway. The existing driveway is a little to the east. You can see, do you see up there on the park? That's the tail of the driveway right there. That's how we bring mowing equipment into the park.
That's the tail, and it comes straight down here.
I see, so we're just moving it. It's
And you remember at the round table, the county talked about the need to do that because of the need to have the bike lane taper slowly back into the travel lane.
That's right.
I will say Erica's here, and even though it's not her project, if you have a really specific engineering question, it's for her.
And what, can we address this what we heard from Ms. Stevens-Hummel about the size of the meadow?
That was my next question.
I think I can address that. First of all, I want to acknowledge that the Stevens family is made up of individuals, and so we've received communications from various individuals, so I don't want to characterize any of their comments as being monolithic to the family. But my understanding of the testimony that you heard today is amplified by another communication from a family member that you all received this morning. So the reason I'm putting those two together is that my understanding is that the Stevens family, the city purchased what we call in our charter Stevens Meadows in, I believe it was either 2 or 3 separate transactions. And one of those particular transactions, the family colloquially refers to that particular property as the homestead property. And the homestead property has a Metro conservation easement on it. And in terms of the, what my understanding of the family's request about a misunderstanding is that we characterized all of Stevens Meadows, all of the ways in which the property came to the city in those transactions as Stevens Meadows, and that is 25 acres around that. But what the Stevens family is I believe, trying to convey to us is as a misunderstanding on our part is that they think of those properties as separate, that there is Stevens Meadow, and it is about 20.5 acres, and then there's the homestead property, which is about 4.5 acres. And so from their perspective, it appears, I think, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe what they're trying to convey to us is their preference would be that we further identify, instead of saying it's a 25-acre parcel, and so 0.2 of that acreage is only 1%, that they, and again, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe what they're trying to say is we don't think that's accurate because really it's you should use 20.5 acres as opposed to 25 acres, thus the percentage of property that we're saying would be needed for the easement, the slope easement, the right-of-way, and the temporary construction easement would be something more like 5% of the total property, whereas if we use 25 acres to describe Stevens Meadows, 0.4 acres is 2% of the property.
I think you said, though, and I think it'd be good to repeat that when Chapter 10 passed, though, Chapter 10 lumped them together.
Right.
And actually, if you read the definition, it specifically said, by Stevens Meadow, we mean these 2 parcels. And so I think that's sort of the challenge, is that the charter uses one set of language and the family would like us to use a different. But if we're amending the charter, we need to use I think.
Yeah, and so, I mean, again, without disputing that the Stevens family's understanding of how the property came to the city in these differing parcels, that for the purposes of the charter, it does refer to Stevens Meadows as a 25-acre property. And so that is why I drafted the ordinance in that way, to indicate that what we're talking about is the Stevens Meadow property that's in the charter, which is described as 25 acres. But I do understand what the Stevens family is saying, which is, well, they have different applicable restrictions, and so maybe it's a better idea to disentangle those things, is my understanding of. I think they have other concerns, but specifically with regard to describing the property, it's my understanding they would prefer that we not describe it as 25 acres as it is in the charter, but use some perhaps other descriptor of the total amount of acreage.
Gotcha. No, thank you for that clarification. And what about the issue of the conservation easement?
The conservation easement that Metro has covers all of the property that the voters would be asked to remove from Chapter 10's protections. And so in the order of operations, the city would move first to see whether or not the voters would approve of this project being built by amending the charter and removing that particular strip of property from Chapter 10. And then the next order of operation would be that Metro would need to act to also amend their conservation easement to allow the county to build a road on what would otherwise be subject to a conservation easement. Okay. So it's an order of operations rather than it's order of operations. So
gotcha.
The ballot
and that's like a
first.
Legislative decision type thing, but by Metro?
Yes, Metro has been, yes, and they've participated in discussions, and so they understand this order of operations. And they did have an opportunity to review after the publication of the resolution. They reviewed it and let me know that they had seen it and did not have any concerns about the order of operations, at least.
Okay.
Or
two-step process. First, Chapter 10. Second, Metro conservation easement.
That's correct.
And
yes.
Has Metro given us any indication of how they would act?
I can say that they have not voiced any concerns, or they've never told us that they would not consider adjusting the conservation easement. They have not told the county that they would refuse to do that. But of course, that's very different than saying what they will do. So I want to make clear, Metro has not said what they will do, but they have not voiced any opposition or concern about being placed in a position to amend a conservation easement in order to allow the project.
Right. And for what it's worth, I mean, they do own these properties to the south, and they are also selling a portion of their properties for this project to go forward. They attended our joint meeting and have been active participants in the project. So it would seem a little, I don't know, nonsensical, I guess, to sell their property and then stand in the way of
a substantial amount of this project is on property that Metro acquired with natural resources dollars.
If they were concerned about the conservation easement, the time to voice it has, and the opportunity has been there. They have not voiced any concern. They seem supportive of this project.
Can I ask a question then, just to make sure? Who manages the 25 acres?
City of Lake Oswego.
So Metro doesn't?
No, but we do it consistent with the conservation easement.
Right, so it's just a conservation easement. There's no, so.
Yeah, my understanding from the email that we received today is that the homestead property was sold to us for the purpose of providing public access to the original 20 acres. And the request in the email today was that we have actually a more expansive ballot measure that would enable us to build essentially a trailhead or parking lot on the homestead property and to fulfill that original commitment. The challenge we have, of course, is that, first of all, that's not what you all directed us to do. You've been very tightly focused on the intersection. But I think you'd want to have a broader conversation with the community if that's what you wanted to do. But I think that the original conservation easement thinks about that property as an eventual trailhead for the rest of the park. That was why it's there.
So we as a city, on our mapping, have 25-acre park, and we don't distinguish between the different parcels. Thank you.
Sorry to my colleagues on the screen. There was a map on top of you, and I didn't see your hands up. Councilor Mboop, please go ahead.
I hope you hear me. My internet is very unstable.
We hear you.
So, yeah, thank you, Madison. And, this is a nice presentation. My only concern here is I hear some folks talking about Chapter 10. I just, we have to be very clear about what we want. And that's what we want is there is a problem in a property that the city owns, and that problem is there may be accident, it's a safety problem. And we have the opportunity to solve that without having to put any money coming from the city. But there is something that's on our way, which is Chapter 10. We want to make sure to tell the voters that we are not talking about making things like changing Chapter 10. It's already, people voted for it. The city respect the voice of Lake Oswego, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, and that's what we believe. But we want to have a way to build this, safety, this intersection, and make it safer. So I heard some folks who are, some of the people who were on public comment. What I want is they submit what they think is what we should do, that the city is not refusing to say very clearly to all the voters of the city of Lake Oswego that what we want is to be able to build that. If we want to change Chapter 10, we can introduce another ballot to challenge Chapter 10. This is not what we're doing here, and this is not our intention. Our intention is to build something that make this place safe, and that's our job as city leaders, to make our community safer. And that's what we're trying to do, but we want to do it in the most legitimate way and in the legal way. We are not here to change anything, and we have to challenge the narrative that the city is the enemy. We're not the enemy of anybody. We are here to serve you, and to serve you in a way that make things like in a very legal way and very, like we're not here to play tricks that, they're trying to change. We're not changing anything. What we want is clear. We want to build that path. If we don't, the county will move the money somewhere else. As the cities want to do some projects that are also for safety purposes. So we want the population of Lake Oswego to vet, to weigh this initiative. And for those who think the city is making, I read some emails, I'm, away, and but I just want them to know, just send what you think we should put in the measure. Just send it. The city manager will listen to you. That's what she's been doing all the time, listening to people. The mayor will listen to you. The city council will listen to you. And that's we are in a public here. We are very clear. If you think you have something you want to add, that you want to challenge, if it's what we want to say, that's very clear, send it. Send it. It's, that's, I think we're not here. We should not. And I think we all accept that we're not here to create a problem, us versus them. This is not. We are here to solve the safety problems in Lake Oswego. Anyone who wants to add something to make it better, you are welcome. Just send us something. But we're going to put this thing on the ballot, and people will vote. If they don't want that safety thing, they want to preserve the 0.4 acre of the 20.5 acres, they will vote no. And we'll move on. No one is there won't be hard feelings. We say we've tried. As city leaders, we think this is a problem and we need to solve it. But we're not here to be opposing these guys or these people against us. That's not that. And I just wanted to make sure that that's what we are going to vote today, that we are voting to have this thing on the ballot. But we're not tricking anybody. People in Lake Oswego, they know how to read. We're going to make it very clear. Those who commented think that there's some problem, send us what you say, and we'll see if we don't put it on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mboop. Councilor Afghan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some comments and then a question at the end of it. My position has been, this is a safety issue, and we shouldn't compromise on safety. And my position is that if there is a safety issue, it is our job to make sure that safety issue is mitigated. So that's where I stand. And I think the other meeting we had with the county, I was clear on that as well. So if you have to go forward with this measure, I'm on board 100%. There are a couple of other dynamics that I think we need to keep in mind as we go forward. For example, the city residences have clearly said we don't want development there. So one of the challenges I've seen throughout this process is that the county's design and maybe goals have been set prior to Chapter 10, I'm sorry. So I don't want the footprint of this safety mitigation keep growing because it can. So I want to make sure it shrinks and addresses just the safety topics and not address anything else like convenience or other things that the county wants to address. So my question is, in this measure, can we say not to exceed these very specific numbers that we're putting out to the voters? And when hopefully we get the approval from our voters, I really want to exercise the county to revisit their goals for the project and make sure that they keep shrinking the area that is impacted. So question is, can we say not to exceed these numbers?
Well, it looks like it says not to the 0.4 acres, right?
Yes, Councilor Afghan, this is City Attorney Osanak. Yes, it's an excellent question, one that we attempted to address in the ordinance to say exactly that it is only up to 0.4 acres, and furthermore, that that acreage may only be used for the purposes that are described in the summary, which is for the purpose of allowing the county to construct a permanent road improvement and to realign the driveway so that the city may continue to have access to maintain the park.
That is great. Thank you so much. I would like to express my full support with this. If we can agree that we will continue our conversation with the county and making sure their design is now considers Chapter 10 and start shrinking the scope and the impact to that area for what is safety mitigation.
Yes, I'd say that's been a big, topic of conversation that I think the county has done a good job of addressing, that you want to make sure that they're doing they're constructing a project with an alignment that produces the safest results with the most minimal impact. And so that's what they have been trying to do from the get-go. And they did a good job at our meeting here that we convened with neighbors, county and Metro, to explain how, other alternatives like a stoplight, like stop signs, like other alignments, like shifting the roundabout this way or that way, they all either produce results that are not compliant with national traffic design safety standards, or they produce designs that will result in more traffic fatalities than currently exist, or a failing intersection. So I left that meeting personally with the feeling good that they had come up with a design that is the least impact with producing the safest result. And I feel like they take the concerns of the community very seriously, looking at how they can, and they have adjusted the project accordingly in their design process to make sure that it meets those shared goals. I think we can feel good about it, yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for the great discussion. And I just want to note too that it's, I appreciate the clarity that's been provided in the staff report. folks who attended the roundtable discussion really wanted to make sure that it's clear what the amendment is going to be. And I see that Ms. Osnek here in this attachment has provided a very simple one sentence amendment. So it's very straightforward to understand. This is limited to this road improvement. That is a concern, especially for the advocates who put forth Chapter 10, understandably wanting to make sure that it's very clear what we're doing, that this is limited to that safety improvement project, that it seemed like many of the neighbors, not all of them, were very concerned about. Everyone realizes the dangers of that intersection and the need to make this improvement. But realizing that the road is, bisects two different natural areas, any attempt at, minimizing impacts to the Lake Oswego side just exacerbates impacts to the metro side of the same natural area, which even has a further slope and would require even more work and be even more detrimental to the natural area as a whole. So we were trying to get away from who owns what and more focus on the impacts of the entire project area. So thank you. All right, would someone like to make a motion to adopt this resolution?
I will make a motion.
Yes, please.
I'd like to make a motion to move to adopt Resolution 2428. Is there more? Actually, there's.
No, I think that's it.
Is that good enough?
Yeah. Motion moved by Councilor Raff and seconded by Councilor Windland. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Aye. No, any opposed? Okay, motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much. We appreciate the good work. Thank you. No. Okay, one more ballot measure here. So next item on the agenda is Resolution 24-17. This is resolution of the council submitting a measure to the voters, again, at November 5th general election, prohibiting psilocybin facilities within the city. Similar process as before, but we'll start with a re-review of the public comment procedures, a quick re-synopsis perhaps.
Members of the council, this too is a legislative decision, and you've decided to allow public comment, which will be up to 3 minutes per individual if folks would like to provide comment. And again, it's not typically back and forth, it's just you all receiving the comment.
Do we have a staff? No.
Ellen's going to do staff presentation too.
I am your staff
Okay,
wonderful. I think the council report hopefully sort of lays out the history, and for the benefit of the public and those in attendance, I'll lay it out again, which is that in 2020, Oregon voters approved a measure that legalized and regulated psilocybin in Oregon. Cities were allowed to opt out, and approximately 137 cities in Oregon did opt out, including Lake Oswego. The opt-out requires that the ban, opting out of allowing these facilities in your town, required then that the voters actually either affirm the ban or overturn the ban. So in 2020, in 2022, you all did adopt an ordinance temporarily banning these facilities, and that then triggered the mandatory vote on that ban at the next statewide general election, which is this election and on November of 2024. At the same time, you all also asked city staff and the Planning Commission to consider other restrictions that were not in state law regarding these facilities. We call those time, place, and manner restrictions. The Planning Commission undertook that effort, and then on December 5th of 2023, you all adopted an ordinance that added certain local restrictions, mainly to do with home occupations and co-location of facilities. And so you all passed those. And what that means is that there's a ban, and there are also time, place, and manner restrictions. So if by the referral of this measure, the voters were to decide that they want to allow psilocybin facilities, then the state and local restrictions would apply to those facilities should they be located in Lake Oswego, or the voters may choose to uphold the ban that you all passed in 2022, in which case psilocybin facilities would not be allowed in Lake Oswego, and our time, place, and manner restrictions would obviously not be applicable because we would not have facilities.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Osnek. Does anyone have any questions? No questions? Wait, would someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 2417.
All right. Okay.
Second.
Motion made by Counselor Raff, seconded by Counselor Wendland. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Hearing none. Okay, motion passes 7-0. Thank you so much.
John and I are just the most active.
Well, I know. It's-
Just cranking it through.
All right, we have information. Yes, thank you both for making the motions, keeping us moving. Motion sickness, we may call it. We had if anyone has any information from council, I just have a few things. There was a ribbon cutting before the meeting today for the Mercy Greenbrae housing. That's the 100 units down there in Mary's Woods. They had a large celebration. Many people, especially from the Mary's Woods community, was there. Residents are moving in. They're expected to be 90% full by the end of August, which is good. So yeah. As a reminder, we rezoned that property and provided a tax incentive for it. The 2025 legislative session in Oregon, the long session, transportation is expected to be a big topic there, so that's been dominating kind of our regional conversation recently. I think that Madison is actually going to come back in the end of the month with a draft statement that Clackamas County has come up with that we worked on at our C4 retreat a few weeks ago now. Putting together kind of a draft values and objectives statement from all the cities and the county working together. And so there's been a draft that Madison's going to bring to us so that we can put our stamp of approval on it. But it's looking pretty good. The JPAC table has also put together a kind of values statement, which is pretty similar, honestly, to what the cities of Clackamas County and the county have come up with. Sort of pretty similar. But this has been a big topic. The 2025 transportation package, understandably, it's a big deal. Metro also, they held a meeting. We've talked about supportive housing services in here. We were going to have someone probably.
Yeah, they've decided that they won't be going to the ballot in November, that the earliest they'd go is May of 2025. So I think we'll bring it later.
Yes, we have
There's
been.
no reason for y'all to weigh in as they're still under formation.
We have been, as part of that process, the Metro mayors advocated delaying past November for a host of reasons, but one being that there had been little to no engagement with the cities on the topic. So this is good to be able to do that. Yeah, that's all I have. Anyone else? Councilwoman?
I just want to thank the city for putting on one heck of a 4th of July celebration. That was beyond expectation again. I thought last year was probably like the peak that we were going to get, and it just, they ran out of pancake material down at the Lions thing. They had to go up to Safeway and get more stuff. There were so many people. I think the measure of candy, which is not exactly scientific, but given out to kids at the parade was exceptional, and we ran out again, which means that there was more people that were lining up. And what I was most impressed about was the number of kids that were lining the streets that had super happy, smiley faces. And I happen to have some family from California that came up, and they said, "Oh my gosh, this truly is Americana at its finest." And they were thrilled to death to be here. And I will say that our city staff was running around like crazy doing everything. And again, it went off without, I didn't notice any flaws. I think maybe there was one or two, other than for the city council entry into the parade. We were probably a B minus.
Not our fault.
A B minus or maybe a D plus,
I think
somewhere
it's
around there.
entirely your fault as a group.
Yes, it was. But we will try to improve to make the parade better next year. But I have to say, super fun. And thank you to the whole staff of Lake Oswego. An exceptional job, as always.
Thank you. I'll pass it on. And it wasn't just that. The park was, Millennium Plaza Park was full all afternoon, very busy. The laser show was more crowded than I've seen. So just a few small things. The dumpster fire from someone who decided to dump their still warm fireworks in the dumpster. Yeah, and then just a few small incidents.
If I could add on to that, I think what we're starting to see, at least in the 4 years that I've been on city council is Lake Oswego year after year continues to be a destination for people to celebrate the 4th of July. It's not just, so the people that we saw lining the streets, people coming out for the fireworks show and the laser light show, it's residents, but it's their friends from out of town or people from other parts of Oregon. This is the vision that we've all been driving for, right? People, Lake Oswego is a destination for living. So congratulations, city.
Great, well said.
I have just a couple of small things. Just a reminder, I'm sure you've all forgotten this, but you don't have any council meetings in the month of August. So you do have a council meeting on July 30th. It is a 3 o'clock start. Also, just in case you missed it, we are moving your council meeting on November 5th to 3 p.m. start. Okay, so please, if you haven't accepted the calendar invitation from Carrie, please do so. Because if you show up at 5:30, we might be almost done. Right.
Good reminder. Okay. All right, well, next, we are going to move into executive session. Before we conclude the meeting, we'll ask Ms. Osnak to read the legal parameters for us, please.
Correct. Members of the City Council, you will now meet under the authority of Oregon Revised Statute 192.6602D, and that is the section that authorizes you to conduct deliberations with persons designed to carry on labor negotiations. And furthermore, you're going to consider some records that are exempt by law from public inspection. No final decision may be made in an executive session, and members of the news media who are often permitted to attend executive session may not attend executive sessions where labor negotiations are considered. So, and I believe we will adjourn after. Okay.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we are going to recess, and then we will reconvene in executive session in the side room, and we will adjourn from there. And this will conclude the broadcast portion. Don't hang out any longer.